it's very hard to change someone's first impression.
Mhm.
And you could take the same advice for when you're sending music to a record label. If it's half baked, like artists, people, it's not even artists. People are not always the best judge of something they create. Ask for feedback, play it for your friends, play it for your family. I mean, that's not going to be the most impartial, but get feedback on it. Make sure it's ready to go, and don't just because you recorded 4 songs and you're excited about the first 4 songs you ever recorded, you don't need to blast it out to you don't need to try to blast it out to a bunch of managers and record labels and booking agents, etc.
Live the life you love.
What's going on, y'all? Today's guest is Jordan Kurland. Jordan has been an artist manager for over 25 years and is one of the founders of Brilliant Corners Artist Management, who works with artists such as Def Cab for Cutie, Toro Y Moi, the Postal Service, She and Him, Soccer Mommy, and many, many more. Such an amazing roster, and Jordan has a really, really interesting background and is involved in so many different things. This is such a fun conversation, and really excited to have him on the show and share this with you, right? Jordan is part of 3 nonprofit organizations in San Francisco on who he serves on the board for. They're McSweeney's, who is a nonprofit book publisher, Stern Grove Festival, The Lab. He's also a partner of 3 restaurants, Central Kitchen, Salumeria, and Wise Sons Deli. Jordan is also a political activist. He's been involved in working with the Obama, Clinton, and Biden campaigns. And I'm sure some of you are curious how I feel about that. It's important that we continue talking to each other and continue to listen to each other, right? More importantly than talking is listening, and really listening to other people care about and what it is they want. And I truly believe that most people, regardless of where you sit politically, have good intentions, right? We just want what's best for our families, what's best for our neighbors, best for our friends, and we just want to be happy and be left alone to the most part, right? So it's important to listen to each other and not judge someone for different views, because you're going to learn that most people have most things in common, and most people are good people. I truly believe that, and that's so much fun talking with Jordan and having him on the show. And I hope to have him back again on the podcast, because there's so many other areas that we can dive into. And in this conversation, we talked about him getting started in the industry, the importance of internships, how an artist management company is structured, getting started as an artist manager, touring, right, once touring comes back, and so much more. He had so many great lessons and such good advice. I feel like you guys are going to learn a lot from this. I learned a lot from this in this conversation. And before we get to the conversation with Jordan, as always, please take a quick moment to subscribe to the podcast. So thank you all so much for the support. Now on to the fun stuff. I hope you enjoy this conversation with the amazing Jordan Kurland. All right, we are live. I'm excited to introduce everyone to Jordan Kurland. Jordan, welcome to the show.
Thank you for having me. Happy to be here.
Yeah, absolutely. So before we start recording, you mentioned something. It's kind of why I started a podcast too, that you like doing podcasts, because it's something that you wish existed before when you were getting into the industry. And same here. That's kind of why I started a podcast. But what is it like that you like about podcasts and that you like teaching when you're on shows?
The comment is, it's I love podcasts. I listen to podcasts all the time, but the comment is really more generally having access to resources for someone looking to get into the music business. Because when I was in college and I figured out this is what I wanted to try to make a career out of, which, this is back in, not to date myself, but this is back in the early 90s, there weren't a ton of resources. There were some books about, how to break into the music business, or you could buy the Yellow Pages of Rock, which had, phone numbers and mailing addresses for record labels and things like that. But it wasn't it was a steep learning curve. And I love, what you're doing. And I love what other podcasts are doing and what other blogs are doing, which really kind of pulling the curtain back on this business a little bit and giving people resources and confidence about trying to break into it. I'm a person who loved music from a very early age. Figured out when I was in college that a music industry existed. and wanted to work at it and had no relationships.
Mm-hmm.
So had to navigate that. And I was fortunate because I was living outside Los Angeles. I went to a school called Pitzer College in Claremont, which is about 35 miles east of LA. So I was better positioned to start doing internships and things like that than most people.
Mm-hmm.
But I think, I getting back to it, I have a set of experiences that may or may not be helpful to people, and I like sharing them in the hope that they are helpful.
That's awesome. I love that. I didn't know there was a rock phone book back in the days. So I always warn people, that's probably like the 90s equivalent of Polestar Pro these days. But I always say, when I introduce my students to Polestar Pro, I always say with great power comes great responsibility. So just because you have a contact to a record label or an agent doesn't mean you just start blowing up their emails. Do you have any tips or advice on when to reach out to people in the industry if you have their contact information?
It depends on what you're trying to accomplish, but I think the overall thing to keep in mind is that there's a fine line between persistent and annoying in life and in business. And people are very busy, so it makes sense that you might not hear back and you might follow up, but just be mindful about how you're doing it and how often you're doing it. It's not a, send an email, you don't hear back in 24 hours and email again. There's no hard and fast rule, but just think about put yourself in someone else's shoes, or think about how you like to be communicated with. Because if I'm getting blown up by somebody, it's not going to make me want to respond more quickly.
Right.
It's going to make me not want to respond at all, probably. And I think that's the case for a lot of people. But I think in terms of the right time to reach out, it really depends on what you're looking to do. If you're a band looking for representation, whether that's a booking agent or a manager or an attorney, I say do as much as you can on your own before you try that, because you're going to be more enticing as a potential client if you have stuff going on.
Absolutely.
And we live in a day and age where it's like, someone might just hear a song and say, oh my God, this is the greatest song I've heard all year, and I need to figure out more about this artist. But more often than not, especially with the tools and resources people have now to be able to look at Spotify and see what streams are like, and get a sense if people are selling concert tickets, it's better to just develop what you can, both in being more palatable of a potential client, but also it's important to learn the business a little bit.
Absolutely.
It's more of a blessing than a curse. So sometimes it certainly feels like a curse, but more often than not, it's a blessing. But all of our clients are very savvy and know the business to some extent. Obviously it varies. The Death Cab guys, Death Cab for Cuties, my largest client, they have been since 2003. But they were self-managed before they had me as a manager. So they have a sense of what it goes into it, and that's really important, I think, for an artist. So you can understand, you can be empathetic to what your team is going through, but also that you have a basic understanding of what's going on. A lot of times artists don't really start paying attention to especially if things move very quickly. Artists don't start paying attention to the business until it's, I don't want to say too late, is like, it's not not everything's an episode of VH1 Behind the Music where the business managers embezzle millions of dollars, but oftentimes artists don't start paying attention to the business until there's a reason they need to start paying attention to the business. And generally when there's a reason to start paying attention to the business, it's not for good reasons. It's, why did I just go on tour for 13 months straight and I made $4,000? Type thing. Or why am I, oh wow, I owe this record label 5 more records. It's just, so I think having, and again, now the resources are out there, whether it's this podcast, whether it's other podcasts, whether it's blogs, whether it's books, the information is attainable at this point, or is gettable at this point.
Absolutely. What are some of your favorite resources that you like to recommend for artists?
I still think the best, I haven't read an edition. There's been so many editions since I read it, but the first book I read about the music business, which I still think is kind of the Bible, is Everything You Need to Know About the Music Business
Yeah.
by Donald Passman.
Mhm.
Like that would be the first book I would recommend. You know, my son told me after listening, I never listened to myself talk on a podcast. And my son told me after listening on a podcast that I say, too much. So I'm trying not to say it.
That's funny. I teach my
called it-
students about filler words when
Yeah.
we go into presentations.
Yeah.
And when I'm talking about filler words and explaining it, I hear every single and that I say, and it drives me nuts while I'm explaining it. But yeah, I try to pay attention to my filler words too. I have a note on the top of my questions. No ums and ahs, Chris.
Yeah, it's funny. He's taking a debate class. He's in 7th grade. He's taking a debate class, and his debate teacher calls it verbal trash or verbal junk.
I love it.
So, sorry. So resource wise, that's the book I would get. That's the book I would start with. Yeah, and I think there's obviously, this podcast. There's a music business podcast. Depending on what aspect of the business you're interested, there's Promoter 101, which we were just talking about earlier. There's a new podcast which focuses solely on artist managers called Tough Love.
Go check that out.
So it really depends on the path. And I'm sure there's much more out there. And obviously there's more commercially oriented, less industry specific ones that are great, where you can learn about the process of songwriting, like Song Exploder or Broken Record, which is the Malcolm Gladwell, Rick Rubin one. So those are what I would recommend. But I would really start with, if you're going to do one thing, it's read Donald Passman's book, because that really explains the business thoroughly and in a digestible manner.
For sure. And I'll throw those in the show notes for the listeners. And just one book I always like adding, since we're on the topic, is the book from Ari Herstand. I don't know if you're familiar with that, How to Make It in the New Music Business.
No.
It's almost like the precursor to Donald Passman's book. It's like, okay, a Donald Passman book is like when you get the contracts and all the legal heavy stuff, but what do you do to get the contract? And that's where I feel like Ari's book does a really good job with that.
Great. I'll definitely read that. That's nice to know. Thank you.
Yeah, for sure. How did you get started in artist management? Like, when did you know you wanted to get into the music industry, and then how'd you get started?
So, spare you the details of my music life as a fan, but the key thing about my music life as a fan is that at age 10, I discovered The Who. And I had been a big music fan prior to that, but that changed everything for me. I became such an obsessive fan of The Who and Pete Townsend, and that and playing basketball were kind of the driving forces in my life until I got to college. And when I got to college, my sophomore year, I started writing music reviews for the school magazine. And the thought was, I think my junior year in high school, the thought was I wanted to be a music journalist. So I started poking around on that, and as a writer in college, I started getting sent CDs from college reps. So I started talking to some people working in the business. And that was the first time I ever really realized that there was a business behind all these records that I loved. I know it seems obvious, but that's when like, oh, you can make a career out of this. So originally I wanted to be a music journalist. And the summer before my senior year, I decided I wanted to live in New York with some friends. I grew up in Chicago. I went to college in LA, and I thought, oh, I'm going to live in New York with some friends from college. And I started poking around for music writing internships. I interviewed at Spin Magazine. I don't know, I didn't interview at Billboard, but after I set up the interview at Spin, my sister, sorry, this is a long story, but my sister said, a good friend of hers she grew up with was in college and close with Martin Bandier's daughter. So Martin Bandier's industry legend, founded, Chrysalis, SBK Records, et cetera, et cetera. So, and that's when I started thinking, oh, maybe I should intern at a record label. So I set up an interview at Chrysalis with Marty Bandier's daughter. And I started poking around. I set up an interview at MTV for an internship. And then I figured out who The Who's management was. This is going back to The Who, which was Trinifold. And at the time, in my Yellow Pages of Rock, going back to that, which was the one resource I had that I'd spent $150 on. It said that in New York office, but I got in touch and the New York office had closed. So then I started looking at other management companies just to, so I could say, maybe I want to go interview at a management company, I want to go interview at a record label, I want to go interview, different aspects of the industry. So long story longer, after I interviewed at all the different companies, I felt like management would give me the best overview of the business. And that's what I did. I interviewed I interned 5 days a week, 9 hours a day for free in New York at a company called Seriously Inc. It was run by two people who are still in the music business, Jim Grant, who's still managing, and Roger Kramer, who is now primarily an attorney, and they're both great guys, who I keep in touch with 28 years later.
It's awesome.
Hard to believe. And I spent the summer doing that. And then when I got back to college, it was my senior year. And again, being outside of Los Angeles, I said, hey, I'm going to now intern at a record label so I could see what that's like. So I spent my first semester, my senior year, interning 2 days a week at Geffen Records. And this was the glory days of Geffen. Just to give you a sense, the records that came out in the fall of 1993 or were being set up: Nirvana's In Utero,
Wow.
Guns N' Roses' The Spaghetti Incident. The first whole record was being set up. One of my jobs was calling coffee shops and vintage clothing stores to see if they wanted me to mail them a copy of a record by a new band called the Counting Crows.
Oh, wow.
Sonic Youth was on the label, et cetera, et cetera. So I interned there. The second semester, I interned at a small label, Imago Records, where Henry Rollins and Amy Mann were signed. And then I graduated from college and I looked for a job. And after taking the summer off and traveling, and then I moved back to LA and looked for a job. My first paid job in the music business was answering phones at ASCAP. I was the receptionist at Performing Rights Society ASCAP. 2 weeks into that job, a company that I had sent my resume to, I should back up and say, I also booked a festival my senior year at my school. So I made some relationships that way. And one of the relationships I made was with a management company that also had a talent agency license in San Francisco. Their biggest client was Primus. They also worked with the Melvins and jazz guitarist Charlie Hunter and some other artists. So I had booked a band of theirs for this festival, a band called Merv. And after I graduated, I sent them my resume, and March of 1995, almost a year after I graduated, I got a call and said, hey, we have an opening. Do you want to come up and interview for it? And I was a big, big Primus fan, and I really wanted to work at management. The ASCAP job, the receptionist job, was the typical get your foot in the door, work at a company, it's easy, work your way up, et cetera. But this is what I wanted to be doing. So I took a huge pay cut. I mean, I was still making peanuts, but I took a huge pay cut from what I was getting at ASCAP and moved to San Francisco. And that's how I started my career in management. That was a very long story. I'm sorry. But
No, that's great, because it's something what I always tell people, right? Especially when you're in college, because it's hard to intern when you're not in college, because I guess one of the many benefits of going to college is that you can intern, because a lot of companies will only accept interns when you're in college. And I always tell students, the earlier the better. If you can start in your freshman year with interning, like start interning every semester. And it's amazing that you get all these different areas of the industry too, because it kind of gives you a little more well-rounded perspective and knowledge how all the different areas work. So that's such a great example that I feel a lot of people that are listening can learn from, and hopefully try to implement that in their own college careers.
Yeah, and there are many more music industry specific programs in colleges and universities now. I did not look for that. I didn't know that. I thought I wanted to be a psychologist or psychiatrist. I was a psychology major with a minor in literature. It's funny. But now there are schools that, are geared towards the music industry, but, experience is really, there's obviously a lot you need to know and learn, but experience is so important in this business. And internships are great ways to do that. it obviously helps if you're near one of the hubs, New York or LA or
Yeah.
Nashville, but almost every city has at least some, whether it's a promoter
Hmm.
or, I mean, there's promoters in every city, literally.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
So,
Venues, promoters, radio stations. I
yeah.
mean, there's many more virtual internships now these days too than ever before, which is great. There's
Yeah.
a few labels actually I noticed. I sent my students that are doing virtual internships from Nashville. So it doesn't matter where you are. I mean, there's a lot more opportunity than ever before.
Great.
Cool. A question I want to ask you: who was the first artist you worked with? And the doesn't you don't have to tell me who the artist was, but what I'm interested in is what was the conversation? Like you haven't like managed an artist yet, and like what was the conversation like with that artist to, I guess, almost like sell them on you to represent them?
Well, the first artist I managed was, and we had a very long working relationship with someone who was a year younger than me in college. And it's an artist named Matt Nathanson. And I started managing
That's
Matt.
the first. Wow.
Yeah. So I started managing Matt the beginning of my senior year, the beginning of his junior year. He had put out a CD, self-released a CD, which again, that was a big deal in 1992 or 93 when, like it was expensive. It was hard to do. It was not, it was a commitment then. It's still a commitment, but now it's
Yeah.
much cheaper, much easier to do.
Hmm.
And we were close friends, and I said, I want to manage you. So I came back from my summer internship in management, and, managing Matt that senior year, it was basically getting him shows, right? It was dropping off a cassette or a CD and getting him a slot at a local coffee shop or getting him an open mic night, and making calls to record labels and getting them music. And, obviously no labels were biting. I worked with Matt for 8 years before anyone started to care.
Hmm.
It was, it was developing a little bit of fan base in certain places. He's such a great performer. So he's developing a cult fan base, but things didn't really start to build for him until 2001 when he got on some John Mayer dates right as John Mayer was exploding. But so Matt was my first client. And when I moved to work to San Francisco to work for David Lefkowitz, who was the manager I worked for,
Hmm.
I was doing stuff for Matt on the side and continued to do that. And while I was at David's office, I started to slowly started to build a roster, because my job when I got hired for $8 an hour was to answer phones. I was the low person on the totem pole. It was a 4-person office. Management companies are never, generally have low overhead. And back then record labels did a lot more, and there was a lot less for managers to do. Right.
Hmm.
So I'm not saying that in any negative way, but this is really pre-internet
Hmm.
or
Yeah.
on the internet. Right. So you're not looking after social accounts. You're not looking after web stores. There's just, what you tried to do is you tried to get press, you tried to get on the radio, and you tried to get on MTV, and you toured.
Right.
That was really, there was more, but that was the gist of it. Right.
Hmm.
And record labels or independent publicists, they took care of those jobs. So you were managing those. Then there was obviously a lot of other things to do in terms of working with your artists and creative ideas, and et cetera, et cetera. But now, we have 2 people in our office who deal with socials and deal
Yeah.
with, digital. So, there was a band in my college. They were freshmen when I was a senior, a band called Crumb, who got signed to Quincy Jones had a label called Quest through Warner Brothers. They were a rock band, so it was not the right label for them, but they signed to Quest. I brought them in. They weren't my client, but I brought them in. And then, the first client that I managed a couple, I think one or two other things, but the first client I managed that signed to a major label was a band called Creeper Lagoon, a local San Francisco band. They signed to DreamWorks Records. I started working with them when I was 25, so this was 1997.
Mhm.
They were a fantastic band that was working at the wrong time for the type of music they were making, and there were some other issues internally in the band, but it kind of fizzled out within a few years. But that was my first, like, oh, I've got a band now that could do really well. you know, and, I've got a band signed to a major label. They're getting a lot of attention, et cetera, et cetera. And that was very exciting.
Yeah,
It wasn't until I was able to make it work. I left David's office at the end of 1998 and started my company, Zeitgeist Artist Management, which it's no longer called Zeitgeist, but I started Zeitgeist in 1999. My roster was Matt Nathanson. At that point, I had been co-managing Crumb. I took Crumb with me, but they were kind of at the end of their career. I brought Creeper Lagoon. I brought a band called Beulah, who was a very well-respected indie rock band, part of the Elephant Six Collective, which was comprised of Neutral Milk Hotel and Apples in Stereo and Olivia Tremor Control. So, some very celebrated indie rock bands of the late 90s. And I'd also been working on the Noise Pop Festival at that point. So that was the roster I started my company with. There was not very much money there, but it was enough I took a $10,000 loan from my father, got a small office space I shared with a friend, hired someone part-time to help me out. And I always felt like it was important to have an office for me in terms of how I worked. And I always wanted to be ready. So even if I didn't need that then, I felt like I wanted to have the appearance and I wanted to be ready for when the opportunity came along. Right. So that's, and I was fortunate to be in that position to do it. Right. Not everyone can borrow $10,000 from someone.
Yeah.
So, but I did. And that's how I started. But the company was a struggle until 2003 when Death Cab hired me. I'd been friends with them since they released their right after they released their first record. I met them at South by Southwest for a while, was doing this festival, North by Northwest in Portland.
I remember that, yeah.
And I met them there, and they were big fans of the band Crumb I was managing, and then they ended up touring together, and I booked them in Noise Pop, and we developed a relationship. And then so in 2003, right before Transatlanticism came out, and felt like they were ready to bring on a manager, even though I was by far not the most successful manager they were talking to, because they were a big indie rock band at that point. And they were selling 50, 60,000 records, which we can get to this part later, but that was a lot of records for an independent band and an independent label in that at that time. So they hired me largely based on our relationship, which was great. I felt like I was a very good painter and was always working on the wrong medium, right? Like I would have the wrong canvas. Like I just needed something to prove that I could do this and I could grow as a manager and I can grow an artist's career. Matt Nathanson had signed to Universal Records, I think in 2002. That was exciting. We were getting ready to get his record out when Death Cab hired me, but it was very exciting. It changed the trajectory of my company, my career.
That's awesome. Such a cool story. There's so many directions that go with this. Let me start here. So we're talking about how, I guess, the role of a manager evolved, right? And the people that are part of the management, I guess, company team. So not like the team is around the artist, but a team on the company. What does in today's the company that you co-founded was Brilliant Corners Artist Management.
Right.
What does your team look like? Like besides the managers, like who else, what other roles are you filling in the company?
Well, we're a little bit smaller than we were 14 months ago because of COVID. So we currently, there's a number of people who have hybrid roles in the company that hopefully will be able to move out of the hybrid roles. But we've, like a lot of businesses, we've had to scale back a little bit during this. So I have two partners in the company. I'm the majority partner, and I have two other partners. We have currently 4 people in the company who are managing artists. Of those 4 people, 2 of them are also doing, quote unquote, day-to-day work on some other bigger artists. That's, maybe what they were doing before they started building their own roster. We have 1 person who's dedicated to digital. We have another person who, his title is Artist Management Coordinator. So he assists basically everybody. It's just sort of assists the day-to-day, assists me, whatever, kind of a utility player.
Okay.
He's moving into doing some digital stuff too. And then one of my partners, who was a partner when we merged as Brilliant Corners, was managing the band Phanogram. decided he didn't like managing, resigned from managing Phonogram, and has been really more of a GM role in the company. His name is Josh Rosenfeld. He's also the founder of Barsuk Records, which is the label that Death Cab was on, and has been running an independent record label for almost 25 years. So he also provides invaluable perspective and, you know, for the staff and for campaigns, etc. So that's it. That's the scope. So before COVID, we also I had an assistant who also was our office manager, and we, you know, that role will be filled again eventually. But, you know, the more pressing role that we'll fill again is our touring director. We furloughed him when it was clear there wasn't going to be any touring in the near future. And now the tour is starting up again. We'll likely be bringing him or someone in that position back on.
What does a touring director do? Are they kind of in charge of advancing all of the shows that artists
well, it's I mean, everything touring wise falls under their purview. And so they might, you know, for clients who don't have tour managers, he might advance shows, but most of our clients have tour managers. I also still think, you know, even from the years that I was working with bands and advancing shows because they couldn't afford any crew, I still think it's better to have a person who is going to be at the venue that day be the one advancing the show.
Right. Yeah,
because
I agree.
It's very easy to say, but wait, you told my manager that this would be here rather than you told me. You know, It's being one step closer is better. So in a pinch, he might advance shows, but his role is when we get a tour routing, you know, he'll look over the routing with us, offer feedback, because he's been in all the rooms, all the venues. I haven't. You know, no one in our company is a former touring musician or tour manager. Sometimes musicians or managers move into management. I mean, musicians or tour managers move into become artist managers. We don't have anyone like that on our staff. So he has a perspective of what the venue's like, what the dressing rooms are like, what the neighborhood's like, you know, what is if you Google Maps something and it's a 6-hour drive, he could say, yeah, it's a 6-hour drive, but it's a mountain drive, you know, where like there's always construction in this stretch, you know, like stuff that we don't, you know, so that's a baseline. He then works with us to look over offers. The needs change from band to band. Certainly Death Cab has a larger touring infrastructure. They have a regular tour manager who sticks with them. So, you know, his role for them is you know, and they have very regular crew. So his role with them might change. Is different from another artist, you know, from let's say Best Coast. But, you know, he's hiring crew.
Wow, cool.
You know, he might
ask you that.
not, you know, he'll go out and say, you know, if someone's not, if a regular person's not available, he has a Rolodex of people to call. Or if we have a artist that's doing a one-off show somewhere and we need to find a local sound person because we save money from flying them. Or, hey, we have an artist doing a promotional thing, a radio thing, or a TV thing in a city, and we want to save money by not flying our regular, you know, people out from all over the country, that he might hire that. So so that's really it. It's stuff that we've done. You know, we've had this position now, someone in this position for 6 or 7 years now. You know, before that, we just did it ourselves, but it's really just it's a great resource to have, you know, especially oh, sorry, go ahead. Yeah.
No, so where you were saying?
Well, especially since touring is where we make our money. It's, you know, given the roster we have, like touring is such a huge part of our income stream and their income stream. You know, we need to figure out, you know, it needs to be comfortable. I don't want to say comfortable as a plush, but like they need to be well supported, and we need to be mindful of what money is spent. And
that's such a good role to have on your team. I don't think I've ever heard of a management company like talking about having a tour director, but it makes so much sense now. Like when it comes to filling different roles for artists that are touring, like finding their crew and knowing the venues and just helping with the routing and even knowing the deals. Because I'm assuming he's probably was a tour manager before, so like knowing how deals work, knowing how settlements work. Such a really, really great role. And then it's also a great opportunity for more management companies did this for people to get off the road. I mean,
Yeah.
tour managing is fun and being on the road is fun, but it also wears and tears on your body, your personal relationships, and everything if you're never home. So it's such a great role to have.
Well, that's exactly right. And there's certainly life for touring personnel. Being on tour is a bubble, which is can be really great. But a lot of people who start out on the road decide at some point that they want to be home. It might be because of their home life. Maybe they have children, or they're just burnt out. It's not, so there are a lot of tour managers who are interested in this position. And I think it's larger management, and we're kind of a, still boutique, mid-size, whatever, management company, but larger management companies have this position, and you have to staff up based on your company's needs and your clients' needs. I mean, at the end of the day, our staff is going to reflect the need of our clients, and having touring dialed in is certainly a big need of our clients.
Absolutely. So speaking of the team working around, like to support the management company, it's easy to start these days as an artist manager. I mean, it's not easy to do it right, but it's easy to get started. I mean, I always say anybody could just find a local band or manage their friend's band and start artist managing today. So if they're doing that and they're having some success with it and they're starting to have some income coming in, which role would you fill first to expand a management company? Because you talked about having that loan and being able to hire what sounds like an assistant as your first role. Which role would you fill first in today's world?
I think it depends on the band. I mean, if you're going to hire, if you're a solo manager and you're going to hire a person, that person needs to be doing a lot of different things, right? But it also has to do with what you as a manager want to be doing and what you don't want to be doing, right? I mean, the goal is, one of the driving reason an artist hires a manager, should hire a manager, is because they want to take things off of their plate,
right,
so they can focus on being creative. One of the reasons why a manager should hire staff is to, having people who are, better at things than you are, but that first hire is so it can free you up from doing all the busy work, so you can focus on things that are bigger picture. And like, I don't mind dropping off packages at the post office. I don't, I was that person, right? I used to, when I started working for Dave Lefkowitz, I was a person going out and picking burritos up for lunch, so, but is that the best use of my time? Right. And so if you're going to add a person, it's just someone who's answering the phone before you do. So you're not being, phones don't ring as much as they used to because of, but it's just, it's doing all the, it's really doing the stuff that it's not that you want to get off your plate. Right. And busy work, et cetera, et cetera. But so let's just, to make it a little more clear, it might be, let's say you've got an artist that's growing. They're not, they're playing clubs, they're doing well at clubs, they're bringing in a little bit of money. So where do you need, and you feel like, okay, I'm making enough now that I could hire someone part-time or full-time. So what would you want them to do? Well, could be, social media stuff,
right,
is an example. It could be, scheduling interviews, scheduling promo. So you're not, or sending out the promo schedules, maybe not scheduling it. Coordinating with, if the band has a tour manager, talking to the tour manager about what they need. There's just, kind of, very baseline stuff that, my brain, even my, I'm turning 49 next month, right? So, but even my 30-year-old brain didn't need to be up, right? Someone once they're up to speed can be handling it, so that I could be talking with my artists, thinking bigger picture, talking to the record label, talking to the booking agent, et cetera, and hustling.
That's such a good response, because I don't think it's a cookie cutter answer either. It really
Yeah.
depends, as you mentioned, it depends on what you need and what your artists need, right? Because I'm I got laid off after once COVID started because I used to work for AEG Presents as a production manager, and there's no need for production managers anymore right
Yeah.
now. And so I went back into artist management, which I was in before, working with a mentor of mine, Randy Dees. I don't know if you guys ever crossed paths, but he worked
Yeah.
with
Oh, them
Creed,
today.
Paramore,
Yeah.
those types of artists. And I feel like the biggest need I have now with the types of clients I'm working with, especially I have a couple of podcasters as well. They like my ability in editing, and I can do video, and it's like, man, that stuff's so tedious. So I'm
Yep.
thinking of like bringing in a videographer that can do editing and can do some photos and some content for YouTube videos. So it all depends on each different company and what your artist needs. So that's such a good answer.
Yeah, well, thanks. Yeah, and I think, a digital person, it's not all social media. There's, again, these are all things, it's not things that I'm not capable of doing. Like, these aren't things you're not capable of doing, right? It's just things that someone else might be able to do them better or more efficiently.
Right.
But more importantly, it's going to free you up to do things that are going to grow your business and
Exactly.
the business of your artist.
Yep, exactly. Totally makes sense. When you first start working with a new artist, what do those first 60 to 90 days look like? What are you working on first? Are you working on any kind of fundamental stuff like branding and what kind of messaging we put out on social media? Or like, what does that look like?
It really depends on the artist, right? Not to deflect the question, but it could be, let's say you get hired by an artist that's putting a record out in 3 months,
Mhm,
and you're diving into the album campaign.
mhm,
Or if you get hired by an artist that's about to go on tour, then you're diving into that. So I think the best, case study might be if you're hired by a young artist or developing artist who has a record made, is talking to some record labels. What are you you know I what are you doing? Like, what
mhm.
what do we need? I mean, the first 60, 90 days, for example, I mean, first and foremost, you're getting to know your artist,
Right.
right? That is such that is the manager client relationship, if working well, is going to be the most trusted, intimate relationship that an artist has,
Mhm,
right? You have to trust that your manager is representing you well and acting in your behalf. And as a manager, you have to get to know the artist and what they want and how they want to be represented, and figuring out, and I don't say this in a negative way, but figuring out the quirks, figuring
mhm,
out, like, oh, this is how, um, this is how this artist likes things to be done, right?
mhm,
And this is this is more important to this artist than this other thing. So this is what you need to focus on. But the first 60, 90 days, it's getting, I mean, there's a lot of boring stuff, like getting all the information you need on hand: home addresses, social security, passports, driving,
right,
things. So we have the resources that when we need them.
mhm,
It's a lot of talking to the client, figuring out what needs are there, making sure that social media is in a good place, making sure there's a web, making like these dotting the i's, crossing the t's. If
mhm,
they don't have a booking agent, but they need, figuring out where their needs are, like what members of the team need to be added. um, do they have are they looking for a record deal? Is this the right time to look for a record deal? Are they wanting to self-release something, then figuring out what the right platform is? So it could really just vary from artist to artist. But that 60 to 90 days, really the first 6 months, give or take, it's just so crucial in terms of the getting to know you period,
mhm,
of the process. It's
for
not
sure.
um, so I, I, I feel that, and this goes back to, I know your question at the beginning about what's the right time for an artist to reach out to, look for representation or whatever.
Mhm,
It's so important to get something going in your backyard, as
yeah.
in not literally your backyard, but maybe in COVID, literally your backyard. But
Right.
if you're an artist, develop your fan base locally
Mhm,
and, branch out from there. Don't try to, look, there might be an opportunity that comes up. You might be friends with the band is like, hey, cool, you got a new band, come tour with me nationally. And I'm not saying,
Right.
not saying don't do that, but do not try to spread yourself too thin. Try to develop, your physical fan base locally, in terms of playing shows, seeing what resource, is there an independent record store in town that will take your album on consignment? Is there a local college radio station that, is going to play, might play your type of music? But also do your research, right? If you're a pop artist, don't try to get your record stocked at the hipster indie record store, and don't try to go to the freeform college radio station expecting it airplay. I think that's a common mistake where, you're trying to, no, it's a waste of time for you. I'm not even saying like for the person, but do the research and figure out like, this is the right venue for me to play.
Right.
This is the right, if I'm going to hang flyers up, or I'm going to try to put 3 copies of my album on consignment here, this is the right store. This local radio station has a specialty show focused on local artists. Let's get music there, these simple things. And obviously, so that's on the local level, but the resources, Spotify, SoundCloud, et cetera, obviously taking care of all of that too. But it's just, I think, I guess what I'm trying to say is you don't need to move. Don't try to take on everything at once. Just because you've recorded a record doesn't mean you need to go tour nationally or regionally, and figure out what your needs are. Some bands don't need a manager initially, like Death Cab, like they can take care of their stuff. Some bands, having a manager early on is important. Having an attorney early on might be important, but don't, just because there's people out there that do this stuff doesn't mean you need them.
Right. That's such a good segue to where I was going to go next. I was kind of shifting from the management side to the artist side. So a couple of things you said. First, like figuring out playing the right venue, right? I have this rule that a couple of people are borrowing from me now, but as in a classroom setting, you try to kind of, I know there's like, it's not a cookie cutter business, not one way to do it, but you try to kind of set up some parameters, like aim for this, and then you're ready for that. So as far as playing venues, I have this rule called the 50% rule, where you shouldn't play a venue unless you and all the artists playing can fill at least 50% of the capacity or more. Otherwise, play smaller, and ideally underplay. Try to find a venue that you can sell out. I guess what kind of parameters do you have for artists in starting playing live, like locally, like knowing what type, like size venue to play, and then also when to move up into bigger venues?
Well, I think the important thing is to be honest.
Yeah.
Oftentimes you might talk to the booker at a small club who needs, they've got a band coming through town who isn't going to sell the room out, and they need a local opener that is going to be worth tickets. And so if he or she says, hey, I need someone who's going to bring in at least 50 to 100 people, be sure you can bring in 50 to 100 people, because if you say you can and you bring in 12, they're not going to book you again for a very long time. You're going to be shooting yourself in the foot. So it's really just about playing. I mean, I'm of the perspective of like, play everywhere and anywhere, get your live show honed, but it's not, obviously don't, like you said, don't overreach, don't, if you're just starting out, don't try to get booked headlining a 500 capacity room if you're going to bring 20 people.
Right.
There are certainly slow nights of, it's funny talking about live music right now because it hasn't been for so long, but like
we're transitioning slowly back in there.
Yeah, exactly. No, but there are plenty of small clubs that have nights where they don't need to, they just want to have new artists. They just want to, they just want to have some people in the room because they need to sell beer and they want to give opportunity for artists to play. And, that happens too. So I don't have a hard and fast rule of like when, you move up when you can do the business, getting on shows is obviously a great way. Being a support act on a show is obviously a great way to build a base, but it's the same rule of thumb as you're talking about as far as knowing the venues and knowing the record stores and knowing the this and, make sure it's a show that don't just try to get on a show to get on a show. Try to make sure it's a show you think people are going to respond to you. Because again, same thing. You can be put on a buyer at a club might put you on a show because you ask them to get on, you're an R&B artist and you ask them to get on no one's going to do this, and you ask them to get on a metal show, it's not going to go well for anybody, right? So you're going to get booed off the stage or people aren't going to respond. The buyer's going to not think you're good, or not, it's just, so just be self-aware and be aware of what you're asking and why you're asking something. It's really, I'm not trying to belittle, but it's really just common sense.
Yeah, no, that's so true. I mean, one important thing you said is when the buyer asked, if you can bring 50 to 100 people and you only bring 12, what they may not book you again for a while. And that's so true. Like I used to work for House of Blues in New Orleans. I was the junior buyer. So I booked a small venue called the Parish. And then my boss, Sonny, booked the music hall. And there's an artist we booked at the Parish, barely sold any tickets. And then a year later, he didn't want to book them again because they didn't sell enough tickets. And I'm like, dude, they've grown in a year's time. But they just have that memory and everything blends together. Like a year later, it might feel to them like 3 months. It was only 3 months ago, but it's kind of like you have to refresh their memory. Hey, this is what's been going on over the past year, and the artist has grown. But yeah, that really does happen where buyers are not booking artists again.
It's very hard to change someone's first impression, and you could take the same exact advice for when you're sending music to a record label. If it's half baked, like artists, people, it's not even artists. People are not always the best judge of something they create, right? So ask for feedback, play it for your friends, play it for your family. I mean, that's not gonna be the most impartial, but get feedback on it. Make sure it's ready to go, and don't just because you recorded 4 songs and you're excited about the first 4 songs you ever recorded, you don't need to blast it out to you don't need to try to blast it out to a bunch of managers and record labels and booking agents, et cetera. Even going back to Matt Nathanson, my first client, I was shopping that CD, his first CD that he recorded as a 19 or 20-year-old in college. He didn't get, people listened to it. He didn't get any, record deal out of it. And I couldn't go back to them for a long time.
Yeah.
They're like, people are like, oh yeah, this is promising, let's see what you do. So then that's the feedback you're going to get. Right? So get yourself in the strongest position possible before you start trying to build your team. Because if you're in a stronger position, the team you build is going to be further ahead as well. That's not to say if you have a friend with business acumen who wants to manage you. I mean, look, that's what I did, right? I mean, that's, right. I did that. And then I was lucky enough to get a job in a management company where I really learned, maybe I had instincts, but like I learned what went into managing an artist on a day-to-day basis. But the more you have going on for yourself, the better position you're going to be in for everything going forward. So, what you're saying about, the Parish and, yeah, of course, in a year, hopefully a band's grown and their fan base has exponentially grown, but it's hard to change that first impression. And if someone feels burned, especially, that's why it's just good being honest. If you say like, look, we don't have a fan base, but we're really good. And we think we'll complement the show really well. And this is how we'll promote it. Say that. Don't say, oh yeah, no problem. We'll bring 50 to 100 people in. Yeah. If you're not going to do it.
I like that approach too, of like telling the promoters how you're going to promote it, right? Because there's so many artists that, especially when you get that opening slot or when you're local and you get a guarantee, like they always all of a sudden get like a little lazy because like, oh, we have guaranteed money. We don't have to like work for it to earn our money. But that's how you like can burn relationships really fast with a promoter too. I mean, I think the honesty and being transparent and then
Yeah.
showing, hey, like we're still new, but here is the marketing plan. This is what we're going to do to try to get people out. Or if you have 5,000 flyers, I know you guys hire street teams to get flyers out. We'll do all your flyers and we'll do all your posters around town. Help
Exactly.
add value
Then
somehow.
do it.
Yeah, and then do it.
That's an important thing.
Yeah,
right?
don't just promise
then,
it.
Then do it. You
Yeah.
know, but that stuff goes a long way. And, you know, wearing my talent buyer hat, I mean, I don't book Noise Pop anymore, but I booked Noise Pop, it's a festival, a local club festival in San Francisco that's been going on for almost 30 years now, focused on independent artists, but has, you know, about 50% local bands, other, you know, national touring bands. You know, I booked that festival for years, you know, and so I talked to a lot of local artists about slots, and you remember, like, who's helpful, who's honest, same thing goes with booking it. I have to be, you know, like same thing with booking agents. I mean, one of the nice things about booking that festival and with my primary job as a manager, like I was interacting with booking agents in a different way. So I knew which booking agents were lying about.
Yeah.
Let's not say lying. I knew which booking agents were overly optimistic about
twisting the truth.
Yes, exactly. About how much money an artist is worth. And you just remember that stuff, right? Again, it's a lot of it is how you want to be in life, right? If a friend of yours tells you something that is grossly inflated, are you going to trust that friend next time they tell you something? So treat everyone like that. And that's a pretty good rule of thumb with this stuff. So, so yeah, I don't know if that answered the question well, but
no, but that was a really, really good piece of advice. Like treat it as a best friend. Like you want to be able to trust the person. And that's, I don't know, probably one of the best pieces of advice. Like it seems so simple, but I think it's one of the best pieces of advice I've heard in quite a while. That's like new and different. So thanks for that.
It doesn't mean don't, you know, be confident and believe in what you're doing, but just be honest about what you're doing. You know, that's
so time's going by quickly and I have so many questions. And you do so many interesting things. So I'm gonna bounce around a little bit, but one more artist question. This isn't a world I work in a lot, so I'm just curious, as an established experience manager, like what are your thoughts on the whole subscription Patreon model? Is that something you use for any of your artists? And what are your thoughts on how to do that successfully?
We do not do it for our artists.
Okay.
I think it's a good model for certain artists. I think that depending on the type of artist you are and how you want to interact with your fans and what you want to provide for your fans, it can work really well. So the Patreon model of you're paying a monthly fee and you're going to get certain things exclusively from an artist, that could be totally great. And it, you know, it's so, but it depends. It's all going to go back to goals. And I say this with an artist: should we sign to a record label or should we release something independently?
Right.
If you're an artist that's been around for a while and you have a solid fan base, could you make more money on the recorded piece of music that you are selling if you do it independently than signing to a record label? It is quite possible or even quite likely. However, what you get from having a team of people, whether you're signed to Merge Records or Atlantic Records or, you know, an even smaller independent label, is you get more people working on your behalf, which in theory is going to mean you are going to get more exposure as an artist, which is going to grow your career or maintain your career. And if you're a touring artist, if touring is your main mode of, you know, main way of making money, that's going to help your touring. Right. So you have to really look at how you do it. There's people, it's not a hard and fast rule for everybody. Amanda Palmer has figured out an amazing way.
Yeah.
Right. And not everyone can do that. Not everyone has that type of fan base. Not everyone has that type of savvy that Amanda has. So you have to really look at who you are and what your goals are. So Patreon, to me, are there artists on our roster that can do well on Patreon? Sure. Just as there's artists on a roster that could do really well with NFTs. You have to, again, it goes back to knowing who your audience is and what they want and what your goals are. Right. So I don't know if that's helpful, but.
No, I think that's a couple of very, very important things. Like you have to know who your audience is. And that's probably where the starting artists or starting managers should focus some attention on, like really be able to tell who your ideal fan is, right? Now it's going to take some work and some trial and error, some testing. But I always say if you can have your ideal fan walk into a mall and know which store they have to go to first. Once they walk in, are they going to H&M first? Are they going to Urban Outfitters first? Where do they have to go first? And then where are they going next? And then if they go to eat, where are they going to eat in the mall? Are they eat at one of the restaurants? Are they going to the food court? Like the more you know your fan, it's going to just help you find them easier and understand what they want more.
Yeah, but you could be, I mean, like what's, thinking of like who's the type of artist that could do really well on Patreon as an artist whose fans are just going to eat up everything they do. It's an artist who has really good ideas about new types of content. So I just, if you're, this isn't to belittle any type of artist, but if you're an aging artist and you're not able to tour as much, but you have a very devoted fan base and you can deliver 2 songs a month and some other content, like to your, it's super serving your super fans is what it's doing.
Exactly.
So
like that.
That's what I'm a fan of it for the right artist and for the right reasons.
So I'm gonna shift directions. You serve on the board of 3 different nonprofit organizations.
Yes.
What and I saw in your bio that you'd served in other nonprofits before that. What was it in you that wanted to get involved in the nonprofit world and serve on these boards? Because being an artist manager is almost feels like it's 24/7 job. So I'm sure you're plenty busy. But what was it that you made you want to serve, and then how do you find the time to serve for the community as well?
I mean, it's really simple as far as the why is I just want to give back. And I want to, I love doing it. I think one of the things I love about my job is that the diversity of what I experience on a day-to-day basis work-wise. And I love, that I have other passions in life outside of my core, day-to-day job, and doing some of this nonprofit work, because it's all, arts or arts related organizations, allows me to do it and to be a part of, give back to this community. Most of the nonprofits are San Francisco based. They haven't always been, but it's really about being involved and giving back. I think that's really important if you're able to do it, and so that's really it. I mean, I was brought up with, family, that was an important value. So that's where I learned it from.
I love that. If you're working with an artist, or if there's an artist that wants to, or even an aspiring manager, if they want to give back more, but they feel like they don't have the time or the money or not enough of value to offer, what advice would you give them about getting involved in the community?
And figure out where you want to be involved. I'm also fortunate that many of my clients want to be involved, right? Death Cab is very active, and raised hundreds of thousands of dollars with those live streams he was doing in COVID, so it's, it's lead by example, but I think as an artist wanting to get involved, it's really figuring out where are your passions? What does your community need help? And getting involved doesn't mean sitting on a board. Getting involved could be going to, help serve food at a food bank or a soup kitchen once a month, or on Thanksgiving Day. It can be, there's always, I could speak to where I live, but there's always opportunities to volunteer and clean up the beaches or clean up Golden Gate Park, or there's so many different, especially now, with infrastructures of places starving for funding because of COVID, especially if you're in a major city and they've lost tourism and they've lost a lot of their restaurant, there's just opportunities all over the place. So it can be intimidating in terms of getting involved, for sure, but just start by sending an email, and saying, hey, I'm a local artist and I have time on my hands and I want to help out. There are music industry based resources available, but but at the end of the day, it's like, if you're just looking to do something on a local level, do research and reach out. People always want help.
So true. I love that. That's something I'm very passionate about. I think anybody that wants to get involved, just go dive in. Organizations need so much help, and it's not just. I know you mentioned Thanksgiving, but I used to have an organization where we fed the homeless every Monday night.
No, that's
And
one.
a thing I like reminding people of, Thanksgiving is great and Christmas is great, but people need to eat 365 days a year. So if you can volunteer on, let's say April 9th, if you volunteer on April 9th, no significance to the day. I mean, whatever, like no holiday, whatever. But if you just find a random day to go serve food at a food bank or at a soup kitchen or a homeless shelter, or sort food at a food bank, or go to a youth center and help with tutoring kids. There's so many great things you can do, or working at an animal shelter and helping with the animals for a day.
Yeah, that's exactly it. And I mentioned that kind of like the Thanksgiving, because that's where people, it's just whatever you can do is going to be helpful.
Absolutely.
People, nonprofits always need help, and especially now. There's so much need in the world coming out of what we've been going through for the last 13 years.
Absolutely.
So, I mean, 13 months. God, 13.
Hopefully not 13 years.
So
Dude, don't jinx it.
Yes.
So we're almost out of time. I ask you a couple of quick rapid fire questions. See how many I can get in. But tell me about the first concert you've ever been to, or your first memorable concert experience.
The first concert I went to, I was 6 years old, and I went and saw Sean Cassidy with my family. I don't know if anyone's going to remember Sean Cassidy. Probably not. But the first concert I went to on my own volition was the Beastie Boys on the Licensed Tale tour at the Aragon Ballroom in, I want to say February of 1987, with Fishbone and Murphy's Law opening.
Oh man, I am jealous.
Yeah,
it's such an awesome show.
Yeah, it was a pretty amazing show. I'm pretty sure that's the first concert I remember going to with friends. Yeah.
What's the best advice you've ever gotten?
God, that is a tough question, Chris. There's God, it is. I think it's finish what you started. It's up there. It could be honest, finish what you started. One of my dad's, my dad has so many expressions he would say, but one of is, it's easy to make money, it's hard to hold on to it. I think there's a lot of cliches out there but I think being honest and finishing what you start, right? Like, don't say you're going to do something and not do it.
Yeah,
that's so important. And I think that ties into so much of what we've been, talking about with clubs, like, and being, and like trying to get on shows. It's like, if you say you're gonna do something, do it. That's going to benefit. I mean, in this business and in life, So
I completely agree. What is something that you want to see change in our industry?
I want to see the monetization of streams change.
Mm-hmm.
I want to see artists. I want to see that whole system change. I want to see artists make more money per stream. I think the model is flawed. I don't think artists should be. I don't think the model it's based on, which is cable TV, is the right model. I think if I'm spending $9.99 a month on my Spotify and I'm spending 80% of my time listening to Neil Diamond should get most of that money.
Yeah, completely agree. We could probably go on another half hour just on that alone. But before I ask you the last question, what's the best way for people to connect with you and learn more about what it is that you're doing?
So the management company's website is brilliantcorners.com. I have a personal website, although it's not very exciting, which is jordankurland.net. Noisepop's website is noisepop.com. So I mean, those are really, the different things I have going on. I am on Twitter and Instagram, and recently grudgingly back on Facebook. So I am, and LinkedIn. So I'm on all those places, although probably most active on Instagram and Twitter as far as the social platforms. But I would start with the company site. Yeah.
I'll add that all the show notes as well. And then before I ask you the last question, just thank you so much for taking the time and for being passionate about giving back, even in this way, right? So talking about the giving back to the community, you're also giving back to the music community by going on podcasts and sharing your stories, sharing some lessons and really good tips and wisdom from your experience in the industry. So just thanks for your time and for being here.
Of course. Thank you for having me. It's really been, I wish I had more time. It's really flying by. So so it's really nice. And I'd love to come back at another point if it's ever helpul.
Let's do it. Because there's so many more directions that we can go into, and so many more talking points I had that I even got from Joe, your, if he's your publicist or if he works for your management company. But he had some really, really great points to add too. So would love to do a round two. And then a question I ask everyone at the end is, what's your definition of making it?
I mean, my definition of making it is being content where you are in life. And I know, again, it sounds like a cliche, but as someone who finds it hard to believe that he's turning 49 years old, I've never really, birthdays are tougher to swallow when you don't feel like you're in your right place in life. And it's, success to me, I never set out to be the largest manager in the music business. I never set out to be the wealthiest manager in the music business. I wanted to be, quote unquote successful and have artists that did well and have, relationships and be able to get stuff done. And, I feel like I've achieved that. I feel like I have more to achieve as a human being and as an artist manager. I'm driven, so I'm not, not going to sit here and lie and say I'm totally satisfied where I am in life, but I feel really good about where I am. And I think that's important. I think it's important to check in with yourself and go over your goals, because if you don't have that North Star of what you're trying to achieve, you're just going to feel rudderless. And every time you get something done, you're not going to feel like it's enough. Right. So you kind of check in with yourself and see, what do you want a period of time to bring? What defines success in your life, career-wise, right? Like when I was struggling, which was for a long time, I mean, in hindsight, it's not a long time, right? But at the time, from age 22 to age 32, before Death Cab hired me, and I was just starting out and I was ambitious and I want to be a successful artist manager, I just said, all I want is to have a gold record, see what it feels like, and determine if this is the career path I want to stay on. And I got that, and I'm fortunate. There's so many people in this business who are so talented and so smart and don't achieve what they want to achieve, and they have to leave, whether it's finances or frustration or because I would be lying if I did not say that there's a whole hell of a lot of luck involved with being successful, whether you're an artist or a manager or a booking agent. Like, we all take educated guesses, and sometimes those educated guesses work out and sometimes they don't. So again, a very long answer, but success to me is feeling I mean, yes, there are outward measurements of success, what your income level is, what type of house you live in, like, whatever. I mean, material, but like success is how you define it. So to me, a successful day is if I'm feeling content. That's, I don't know, sorry if I'm getting a little too San Francisco spiritual, but that's really the truth, So I look at success more on a daily basis than I do an annual basis, if that makes sense.
Live the life you love.